Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine War News Update, second by hour for the 4th of May 2024. May the 4th be with you. It's Star Wars Day. So, such a hive of scum and villainy is Russia that we're going to continue talking about it. That also reminds me, I meant to give a little nod to my Antipodean brothers and sisters recently for Anzac Day, the Australian New Zealand Army Corps, lest we forget. It's something that I rue missing out on. I do often, or one of my boys, Oscar, loves a bit of Anzac cookie baking, except he loves it for the mixture and then just wants to eat half the mixture. And literally, he goes and makes it himself now. It really takes mixture away. I'm like, no, we're going to make cookies with that. You can have a bit of that, but anyway, I had a bit of premature cookification recently and made them much earlier, and I should have celebrated Anzac Day or commemorated Anzac Day with some cookies. Right, let's go to the military aid segment and all the video really and equipment. So there's been a big scoop. US is in talks with close partners, so G7, to lead a group of allies that would give as much as $50 billion in aid to Ukraine, with the massive outlay being repaid with the windfall profits from sovereign Russian assets. And that is, according to some sources there, the frozen assets accruing interest mostly in Europe are expected to generate about $5 billion in profits a year. And a central element of the US proposal is to bring forward those proceeds to increase the amount of support Ukraine receives in the near term. So I presume it's a case of like pulling forward those, maybe taking some money out of the American pot or the European pot or whatever, and then repaying that with the Russian profits as they then come in. So because at the moment you only would have accrued 10 billion so far, moving on to 15 billion, but still definitely should be, I think it's Euroclear that's holding on to that, is it? Probably making a pretty penny on the fact that they've got frozen profits, right? So this is going to be super important, given that we are unlikely to see another US bill in the near term. This could be something that US could do without having to pass anything through Congress or whatnot. If they can work together with G7, everyone agrees to do that, and they just spend that money on stuff to Ukraine and get it done sooner rather than later. Bloomberg, US leading efforts within G7 to develop $50 billion of an aid package. US leading talks among G7 to use up to $50 billion. Potential package would reportedly be funded by the profits generated. Is there anything else here? Quote, ideally, this is something we would like the entire G7 to participate in, to be part of, not just have the US doing it alone, says US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, adding that the plan is something that G7 allies are discussing. According to sources familiar with the matter, the US is looking to come to an agreement on a plan for the June G7 meeting in Italy, although sources say that an agreement may take months to come to terms. That's for sure. But it would be great if that, as the US aid packages sort of winds down this year, as they go further and further into the year, and each package is possibly smaller, it might be a good time to then say, oh, and here we have $50 billion from frozen Russian assets. That'd be amazing. US aid, as that's a different form of funding. I don't know exactly what form that takes, whether it's grants, loans, or whatever. Allocates over $250 million to Ukraine's agricultural sector. The funds are allocated to rebuild and expand Ukraine's agricultural sector under the USAID Harvest Program, Deputy Agricultural Minister Denis Bashlik said yesterday, and that's really good news. Ukraine really depends an awful lot on its agricultural sector, which is why it's really important that the borders have been unblocked between Poland and Ukraine. That's apparently already paying off. It's already been responsible for a big uptick in agricultural products going across the border. Right, German aid to Ukraine, a couple of posts from him. The first two, Susanna 2, these are self-propelled howitzers that come from Slovakia, which were financed by Germany, Denmark and Norway, were handed over to Ukraine at the beginning of August 2023. However, no Susanna 2s from this contract have now been delivered to Ukraine for around 9 months. According to Denik N report, this is due to missing barrels, since the manufacturer is prioritising DITA howitzers, which will be delivered to Azerbaijan, over the Susanna 2 howitzers, which will be delivered to Ukraine. I wonder if that's Slovakian government getting their dirty mitts involved. According to the report, in addition to the 2 Susanna 2 delivered last year, 7 Susanna 2s have been produced but are still without barrels, which prevents the delivery to Ukraine. I would like to once again point out that, as far as I can tell, these are unconfirmed media reports, but this would explain why just 2 Susanna 2s have been delivered since a $92 million contract was officially announced in October 2022. That is an awful lot of time, really. And then German Aid says, the last time the German government made the delivery of Leopard 1A5 main battle tanks to Ukraine made it public was around 6 months ago. Since it became known that various Leopard 1A5s had to be sent back to the industry for repair after the training of Ukrainian soldiers due to their poor condition, and in addition to that, no maintenance personnel had been trained back then, which meant that further training had to be carried out in addition. There has been more or less radio silence on the matter. Although we see new footage of Ukrainian soldiers being trained on the Leopard 1A5 every few weeks or months, no new deliveries were made public. Yesterday, my attention was drawn to a piece of research by Wirtschaftswoche, which I would like to comment on briefly. According to Wirtschaftswoche's research, based on statements from ministries and defense companies, Ukraine owns around 90 Leopard 1A5s. 20 more are to be handed over to Ukraine by the end of June, which is being forgotten. However, what is being forgotten, as far as I can tell, is that just because Ukraine already owns the Leopard 1A5s does not mean that they can be operated in Ukraine. From a legal perspective, Ukraine already owns the MBTs during training in Germany, so that doesn't mean that they have been delivered to Ukraine. I therefore continue to firmly believe that Ukraine only has 30 1A5s in its own country. I did see some footage of one the other day, actually. I see no reason why the German government should not disclose the delivery of the MBTs, whereas otherwise it makes nearly everything public. I also monitor a 3-digit number of accounts on Instagram, Telegram, Facebook and TikTok every day for research. So far, I've not been able to note any increase in Leopard 1A5 footage. Would indicate additional deliveries. To be honest, it's very quiet there too. Doesn't prove anything, of course, but I still wanted to point this out. So thanks for that. Really great insights from him. Unfortunately, says John Ridge, this is unlikely to result in any material changes. What's he talking about? So this is the claim that the UK will allow Ukraine to use British provided weapons like the Storm Shadow to strike targets inside Russia, according to British Foreign Secretary David Cameron in an interview with Reuters. Talked about that yesterday. John Ridge is saying this is unlikely to happen because Ukraine is under enormous pressure, arguably coercion from the US, to not use any donated weapons from any country against targets in Russia. So the idea is the anti-escalation group in US administrations, for example, Jake Sullivan, might be putting the kibosh on any other nation giving their weapons to Ukraine for Ukraine to use into Russia. It might be that the US has some kind of umbrella agreement with Ukraine that even though the US says, hey, the UK, for example, says, hey, that's fine. The agreement with the US means that they can't even do that, even if the UK agrees to that. I don't know about this. Bridget Brink, who's the US ambassador to Ukraine, has come out and said, our position from the beginning was that we do not enable and do not encourage the use of our weapons in Russia outside of Ukrainian territory. She noted that Biden's goal is to help Ukraine defend itself and deter future aggression. But that does still give scope for Ukraine to use UK weapons inside Russia. Our weapons inside Russia, she says, and this claim is only concerning the weapons that US provides. Now, there could be something going on behind that, but it's going to be interesting. It could be that they've got enough targets inside Ukraine, inside the occupied territories of Ukraine, to keep those Storm Shadows busy, and they only have very few airframes at the moment that can fire them. So it might not be too much of a problem, but I don't know where we see that going. US intelligence: Putin spends record amounts on his military over paranoid fear of the West limiting Russia's power. So Russian President Vladimir Putin's paranoid fear of the West seeking to limit Russia's power has led him to spend historically record amounts on militarization, according to Director of US National Intelligence Avril Haines. So she had quite an interesting set of statements that she made. She also talked about how this war's not going to end anytime soon, as I reported yesterday. Anyway, quote, Putin continues to believe that Russia is under threat and almost certainly assumes a larger, better equipped military will convey that opinion to Western and domestic audiences, Haines said during the hearing in Congress. Meanwhile, the US is spending quite a bit, but we still come up with these kinds of opinions. So the Good Shepherd here says, but how does this work in practice? Since US aid for Ukraine in terms of what has been budgeted from legislation is now around $170 billion. We've already delivered $45 billion worth of military aid prior to the recent $61 billion package. That 45 number will rise above 80 billion. Now, there's so much problem with what the Good Shepherd is saying here that there's just like, how much is that as military aid? Has that definitely been 45 billion of military aid, and that 61 billion package you're adding onto that says the 45 should rise to 80? That's assuming that that's over $35 billion of that is military aid, where I've argued previously with Colby Badwar that 20 to 25 billion is military aid. So again, these numbers are not correct. Meanwhile, the second largest economy in the EU and largest arms exporter in Europe, i.e. France, has delivered a total of $2.9 billion worth of military aid to Ukraine. Italy, the third largest economy, has delivered 1.1 billion. Spain, the fourth largest, 0.4 billion. The British, despite being number 2 defence spenders in NATO behind the US for the past 30 years and being in Europe, have only delivered 5.5 billion in military aid. All of these numbers, there's a point here that yep, but like he then goes on to say, look on the Canadians, French, Italians, British and Spanish should be increasing their contributions by 300, 400, 500%. But I think this is incorrect. The maths is incorrect due to, the numbers are incorrect that you're putting into that. I'd say that the Kiel Institute shows that Europe has prior to the $61 billion package had outspent the US by $100 billion. What you've also got to look at is not what the bilateral donations are, but what's going through the EU. What you've got to look at is the EU peace facility. Germany has provided double what the UK has provided, and it is also helping through the EU as well, so on and so forth. There's just lots of ways to look at this, and I don't think your man here has done service. And John Ridge, actually, as an American, pops in and said these numbers are mostly wrong or misleading. Since financial year 2022, the US has or will commit $68 billion in security assistance to Ukraine between Presidential Drawdown Authority, $31.7 billion, and the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, $32.7 billion, foreign military financing, $3.2 billion, and other programs. This is in addition to $55 billion in humanitarian and economic assistance. Cumulative US foreign assistance committed to Ukraine through financial year 24 stands at 120 to 130 billion, not $170 billion as claimed. So that's like $50 billion off that. So that's like a third out, give or take. So this is but this is the kind of stuff, and this is from a supposedly fairly sensible account. Sources CRSG, AUO, and legislative text. The Good Shepherd conveniently omits assistance from Germany, Europe's largest economy. Like I said, how convenient. Through 2024, Germany will provide $28 billion euros, $30 billion in security assistance to Ukraine. And of course, when you're talking about much smaller populations and GDP than the US, then you need to take that as a scaled down. What is that in proportion to the US in terms of per capita or GDP? Through the end of 2024, Germany, Britain, France, and Belgium alone will have committed at least 44.86 billion in security assistance for Ukraine. This is 2/3 of the committed US security assistance over the same period. And the question is what are they 2/3 of the population? Are they 2/3 of the GDP? No. And so therefore, as he says, yes, it's manipulative to overestimate the US assistance by around 40% and omit 60% of European security assistance. Reminder that Europe doesn't do enough. Crowd is deeply disingenuous and can't be bothered to read materials they claim to have authoritative expertise on. This is absolutely on point, and I love the fact that it's coming from American, which is to say, your figures are bullshit, your claims are disingenuous, and you don't understand what the Europeans are doing. You might as well be Donald Trump. So, that's not a criticism of America, of the US. I'm not doing that at all. I'm criticizing people who are misreading what's going on. And to add on to that point, really important here, Jack Desh talks about, so when you talk about, when the Good Shepherd, for example, here talks about how much money is going to Ukraine, we talked previously about how much of that isn't actually going to Ukraine, it's going to the US. Right? And here's a really good thread on this. So Jack Detch says, as it looks towards the largest industrial build-up since the Cold War, the US is torn between short and long-term needs. Should the US buy more 155mm artillery ammo, it will double down on future weapons. Here are 4 factors that will influence the build-up of the US defense industry. The Ukraine factor. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is still going to be a major factor in setting requirements. Quote, we're going to be selling 155mm like the drunken sailor for a few years, said Mark Montgomery, a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Over other weapons used in the early days of the Ukraine defense of Kiev are likely to hit a plateau in production. Those include Javelin, HIMARS, Stinger, anti-aircraft missiles. The Pentagon sent to Ukraine in large numbers early in the war and are also included in the supplemental, but which have taken on a secondary role as to the fight. Second point is the allied factor. Allies can help solve the bottleneck problems. The United States is co-developing new glide phase interceptors with Japan. Australia is co-producing guided multiple launch rockets. Germany is co-producing guidance enhanced missiles for Patriot air defenses. Turkey is helping the United States set up 155mm production right in the heart of Texas. But after the political fights that took the supplemental more than 6 months to get through Congress, US officials have acknowledged that the US now has an image problem in showing itself to be a reliable torchbearer for the global defense industrial base. There's another major production plateau that members of Congress are trying to stave off: attack submarines. The Biden administration's proposed budget for the upcoming year slashed funding for 1 attack submarine. For years, producing 2 a year had been a standard, even though US shipyards only produce 1.2 and 1.4 Virgin-class submarines each year, and new variants are 24 to 36 months behind schedule. There are dependencies that are difficult, if not impossible, to cut. The US still buys a significant amount of its titanium from Russia, which is used for everything from landing gears to tank armor, and is only slowly ramping up production of rare earth minerals, which are dominated by China. But the US military's weapons are ravenous for rare earths. The F-35 needs 900 pounds of rare earths to run, and the Virginia-class submarines need more than 10 times that amount. So the third point, regional factor, where Congress and the Pentagon are having trouble jolting the defense industrial base to life for weapons that might be used in the Indo-Pacific. The US's Army precision strike missile that would be used to hit incoming Chinese ships from more than 600 miles out, for instance, is still being developed. The Seeker that would find enemy vessels isn't finished, so there's no way to ramp up capacity, at least not yet. There are going to have to be some trade-offs between preparing for a near-term fight and near-term deterrence, and probably making some trade-offs on some next-generation weapons systems, said Seth Jones, the Senior Vice President and Director of the International Security Program for the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. And the fourth point is the congressional factor. Before the US ramps up industrial capacity, some members of Congress want the Pentagon to take a good hard look at what's already on the books. Quote, where we can look within the budget and say, wouldn't we be better to spend more money on these things than we really do need, House Armed Services Committee ranking member Adam Smith said. So before I get to discussion about, gosh, it'll be great if we had another $50 billion, where are we spending the money that we have? I think that's the first question. End quote. You can read more about that interview with Smith elsewhere. So if you'd like more on this, Foreign Policy just came out the whole story this week. A Congress gives the arsenal of democracy a boost. Now, this then gets on to the point about what Good Shepherd was just saying, which is, look at the US giving all this money to Ukraine already in military aid. And actually, the reality is this. So the US military needs an industrial backbone to function rocket motors, ball bearings, munitions to shoot. Sorry, it's use of a hyphen instead of an M dash there. The US military needs an industrial backbone to function. That's rocket motors, ball bearings, munitions to shoot missiles and counter drones. That backbone just got a major boost from the National Security Supplemental. So this is the US getting a boost from funding that is, scare quotes, for Ukraine. Here are 4 big bottlenecks that the $20 billion injection will tackle. 1, solid rocket motors. One is the production of solid rocket motors used for everything from Javelin to anti-tank weapons that can hit a tank from a little over a mile, away to intercontinental ballistic missiles that can propel warheads across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans if a US war with Russia or China went nuclear. Aerojet Rocketdyne, which is just bought out by L3 Harris Technologies for nearly $5 billion, was one of only a few suppliers, but the supplemental gives several $1 billion for companies such as Orbital ATK to expand their solid rocket motor facilities. So the supplementals that have just passed are as much about helping the US as they are helping other nations. And he continues, and it provides money from Defense Production Act, the same law that Washington used to force US manufacturers to produce more mask gloves and face shields during the coronavirus pandemic, to build out a second tier of rocket motor suppliers. Those include Expo Systems in Texas, Ursa Major in Colorado, and Adranos in Mississippi, which was recently bought out by defense technology company Anduril. The idea is to fast track work that wasn't going to be done until at least 2026, if not later. Second part is cruise missile motors. There's also about $100 million to help Williams, one of the only American makers of cruise missile motors, speed up production in Michigan. Some uses long-range anti-ship missiles that might one day help Taiwan to fend off Chinese landings, armor-piercing joint air-to-surface standoff missiles, Tomahawk land attack missile that the US Navy's weapon of choice, and the Harpoon missile that Ukrainians have used in the Black Sea. The third point is counter drones. So there's a ton of counter drone money, about $600 million that will go towards Coyotes, a small drone capable of intercepting other drones. There is also money for Roadrunners, an air defense munition that takes off vertically, just like the F-35 fighter jet variant flown by the US Marines. And then odds and ends. There's also money to build up factories for ball bearings, printed circuit boards, and other subcomponents for the $311 billion that the Pentagon wants to spend in the upcoming year to develop new weapons, processor assemblies, castings, forgings, microelectrics, and seekers for munitions that have major bottlenecks. But there are recruitment and attrition problems almost across the board, from welders at shipyards to rocket engineers, a generational problem that might need vocational training fixes at the high school level and up. So on and so forth. The point is that the money that is going towards the money that is coming in from these supplementals is going towards helping the US industrial base deal with the needs in Ukraine, but deal with their own needs through sort of replenishment and whatnot. So again, to go back to what, say, the Good Shepherd said, we just have a completely incorrect understanding of what this money is being used to do. And a lot of it is being used to help the US, not just being sent in suitcases to Ukraine. Okay, Ukraine is mounting a new push for the US to send MQ-9 Reaper drones for surveillance, but Washington says the drones are too vulnerable to jamming or vulnerable to being shot down. I think this is probably true, but I think the manufacturers of MQ-9 have said that they will provide drones essentially for $1 to Ukraine. I don't know what's going on with that, but for some reason drones aren't being utilized by the Ukrainians, even though there is a call for them to be used. Armed Forces of Ukraine will receive advanced attack drones with firearms on board, according to Defense Industry Europe. The American company Faloni Aero, American company, there you go, announced the launch of a new line of drones designed to strengthen Ukraine's defense capabilities. These are the Falcon 1.0C with a 5.56mm caliber weapon system, and the Falcon X, which has the world's smallest spike missile. So here we have some of these images coming through of these that might end up being on the, it looks rather like Terminator, doesn't it? End up being on the battlefield in Ukraine. And then we have Russia's answer. Quick take on Russia's Courier, Light Combat and Logistics UGV, unmanned ground vehicle, so a ground drone. This is a self-initiated project headed by Boris Rozhin, the Colonel Kassad on Telegram, and a basic Courier UGV platform costs around $11,000. According to Rozhin, the mass scale production further cost reduction is possible. Anything can be installed on it, from stretchers for the wounded and gratings on trays for transporting goods to electronic war systems, mines, machine guns, grenade launchers, ATGMs and AGS, so those are grenade launchers, and the UGV is designed for a modular principle of use. Rozhin intends to take this UGV in combat soon after it was tried out in March. Back then, see this video, Ukrainian FPV drones hunted and destroyed these UGVs, but Rozhin wants more such combat platforms on the battlefield. There are different Courier modifications advertised, combat logistics and electronic warfare platforms, so you can see them working here, and I guess see the sort of size of them as well, especially with that first one. So the size can be seen in terms of the jerry can and water bottles. These platforms are characterized by low cost and apparent ease with which these remote systems can be operated and assembled. They can still be hunted by Ukrainian FPVs, but also they can be replaced quickly. Another question is, how does the Russian MOD fit into this, considering this development does not come from a large defense industrial enterprise, something they're not used to really doing. In the occupied regions of Ukraine, a single list of all residents is being created with semi-official confirmation that summonses will be sent out from the 1st of November. Those that refuse to fight against Ukraine will be jailed. Upon occupation, Russia guaranteed no summonses for 5 years. So Russia have gone against their guarantee by all accounts. And I don't know about how war crimey this is, but taking over an area, occupying it, and then forcing those people into mobilization into your army to fight against the people who you are otherwise supporting, potentially. So you're taking over areas, mobilizing local Ukrainians to fight against other local Ukrainians. Moving on to sort of JDAMs to finish this. So I know that we've gone now coming back off the Russian bits and pieces there. Just as a bit being said about JDAMs. So these are the dumb bombs have been used as guided glide bombs, just like the Russians used the carb bombs. The Ukrainians got hold of these earlier, but they've not been widely used. There have been some examples of them being successfully used, but there's been a lot of talk about them being jammed or issues with them. Either way, it seems like the French version is being quite successfully used at the moment. Anyway, Thomas Steiner says, well, okay, he's reacting to this OSINT technical. The US Air Force has announced a contract to equip Ukrainian JDAM ERs with home on GPS jam seekers. This would enable Ukrainian Air Force strike aircraft to target Russian GPS jammers near the front, allowing other GPS guided munitions like the Gimlers and 155mm Excalibur to hit targets. So we've been hearing that Gimlers, things like HIMARS Gimlers rockets have been jammed by the Russians, as well as Excalibur. There was a report that the Excalibur, the precision guided artillery shell, had initially a 70% success rate, and that went down to 6%, not by 6%, it went down to 6%. 6 out of 100 of those Excalibur, very expensive artillery shells, were successfully hitting a target. That's a very low rate due to the jamming. So Thomas Steiner said that these have 40 miles or 70 kilometer range. I hope that US Army is adapting the ability to home in onto GPS jammers, also to Gimlers and GLSDB, which have far greater range than JDAM ER. So that's to say that you could adapt Gimlers rockets or GLSDB, which are the ground launched small diameter bomb, those dumb sort of rockets or bombs that are then given a kit rather like the JDAMs, but instead of releasing them from planes, to shoot them from a HIMARS or similar. And they have 150 kilometer range, but they themselves are being jammed at the moment. Now, what they're saying here is they can fit some stuff to these to home in on that which is jamming them, to blow them up, and then you send other ones to do what you're planning on doing initially. So that could be some really good news here. John Ridge talks about this. The USAF has awarded a $23.554 million contract to Scientific Applications and Research Associates for the procurement of home-on GPS jam seekers in support of foreign military sale to Ukraine. These seekers will be installed on Ukrainian JDAM ER bombs. JDAM is extended range, EI is extended range. So really good news there. Fantastic. And of course, California and being, so if you are in a district of California and you're against a war in Ukraine, this is, of course, possibly giving jobs to those in California, in America. Anyway, Jakub Janowski says and this is in response to that same claim, he says that, in my opinion, these could be quite useful, especially if operations of other PGMs are coordinated to exploit any brief windows of Russian GNS jamming. This is exactly what was said originally, which is use these to take out the jammers and then quickly hit with loads of GLSDB or JDAMs or whatever and destroy what you can. I'm going to leave you with this bit of, I like seeing some of these sometimes, I'm going to have to turn the music off, unfortunately. But these are Ukrainians that have been trained by the British and Dutch. I don't know where this would be then, whether this is in Britain or in the Netherlands. Who knows? But they are driving between what looks like Dutch and British soldiers here, giving them the old salute off behind some. I presume there's some, almost certainly some bagpipes in there. The British are involved. But yeah, always nice to see that. And I think this then generates, I don't see this as just training Ukrainian soldiers. It is that, and it's brilliant. But what this does is it gives those soldiers a sense that Ukraine are the good guys, Russia the bad guys. They go and speak to this is an information war, remember, we're in. They go and speak to their family and friends. They talk and spread the, oh no, a lot of drums and bagpipes. They spread the information about the Ukrainians, hopefully correct information that is doing a job for promoting the pro-Ukrainian narrative. So all of these people are themselves part of the information war as well as the real war. That's what I think when I see stuff like that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. I'm going to go and drink lots of tea and build my son a basketball hoop in the back garden because that's how cool I am. Take care. Toodle pips.